Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Bonnie Burnham, President of the World Monuments Fund, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to our Spring 2014 lecture. For the last several years, we've held a lecture in the spring in honor of our Trustee Emeritus, H. Peter Stern, and the topic has been devoted to the theme of travel and how it enriches our lives and our understanding of the world. And of course, the work of WMF is all about the discovery and preservation of significant places all around the world that matter to everyone. Our work would not be possible if it weren't for the support of you world travelers who follow our activities. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, André Aciman. Many of you know his writing from his books, from his novels, his books of essays, and the extensive writing that he does for magazines. He comes from a Jewish family that made its way from Turkey to Alexandria, Egypt, then on to Rome, and eventually to the United States. His memoir, Out of Egypt, published in 1995, recounts the life that the family lived in Alexandria, the remarkable crossroads of civilization for millennia, up until a very complicated time in the mid-20th century. In her review of Out of Egypt in the New York Times, Michiko Kakutani described it as a remarkable memoir that leaves the reader with a mesmerizing portrait of a now vanished world. And maybe that's part of the world that he's going to talk about tonight. In the 1960s, André's family left Egypt and moved to Rome, and then André came on to the US for the university, and he's remained here ever since. He currently teaches at the Graduate Center at the City University of New York and focuses on writing, literary theory, and the work of Marcel Proust. His novels include Harvard Square, which was published just last year in 2013, and several books of essays, including one with the intriguing title, Alibis, Essays on Elsewhere, published in 2011. And as I mentioned, he writes frequently for the New York Review of Books, the New Yorker, the New York Times, the Paris Review, and other magazines. So we're also delighted that André is one of the contributing writers to a 50th anniversary book that we're in the process of putting together for publication next year. 2015 is our 50th anniversary, and there'll be events sprinkled around the calendar this year, next year, and beyond, celebrating that event. The book will be published by Rizzoli in the fall of 2015, accompanied by a photographic exhibition at the International Center for Photography. So please keep that on your horizon, October 2015, to see our great book, presently untitled, with an essay by André Aciman. His talk today is entitled Travel and Mirage, the Lure of Place. It explores themes that are central to our work at WMF, and I myself am very intrigued to hear what he's going to say. So it's my pleasure to welcome André Aciman.
Good evening, everybody. I would like to thank the World Monument Fund and the Morgan Library for hosting me tonight. It is a distinct and unusual pleasure. I will speak, and if we have some time, maybe I will answer some questions at the very end. Let me parody Rousseau's opening word to the social contract and begin by saying that man is born everywhere in the wrong place and at the wrong time. Most of us have made our peace at a reasonably young age with the possibility of having been thrust into the wrong century or the wrong country or the wrong city, possibly the wrong family. You're laughing, okay. Wrong religion, wrong language, wrong profession, wrong schools, wrong face, wrong body, wrong life. If you were born under 3 or more of these errors and haven't yet learned to live with them, well, then I can't help you. You see, I have the same problem. Occasionally, I'll find myself thinking, I shouldn't really be here. This isn't even my century. As you can tell, this malaise is not limited to time and place. Some of us may even feel we might have been given the wrong identity. I should really be someone else. I don't want to go on being me. Can you change me? Can I get a new script, a new lease on life? Or better yet, can you help me become the person I know I truly am? Because this one here isn't working out, isn't even me. Can you take me elsewhere, somewhere far more real than this? My true home, my true self, my true people. Isn't this what the dream of a new love is all about? A new love is not just somebody new to long for or to be with, but it is also the dream of what Dante called the vita nuova, a new life, a new landscape, the real me finally released and kindled into existence. A loved one will come along one day and deliver me from this bondage called me. It's always about us in the end, not necessarily about the other person. And if it's not love, isn't this what all true art promises as well? To let us reach our truest, deepest, most enduring selves by borrowing someone else's skill, someone else's words, or someone else's colors, because left to our own devices, we wouldn't have the slightest or the comprehensive vision, much less the guts to go on into those places that only true artists can take us to. Proust, Michelangelo, Shakespeare, Van Gogh, Bach, Beethoven, Emily Bronte, Cervantes, El Greco, all have gazed at what has neither a shape or a name within them, and then wrestled until they were able to give it something which I'll call form. They looked into their humdrum day-to-day lives and then peeked at their real, if unlived life. The life, to use Adam Phillips' words, they almost missed out on, and in the nick of time, took back. Art is the invention of meaning through form, or put differently, art is the restoration of meaning through form. Art is about discovery and design and a reasoning with chaos. And this because all of these geniuses I just named yearned to see the world around them through the chaos that was within them. They weren't seeing the world as it was, they were seeing other than what lay before them, experiencing not what was given, but always felt, but what was always felt and strangely withheld, and needed to be restored or invented, imagined or remembered. It doesn't matter which. It's the huge negative, the huge refusal to take things as they are that defines the creative imagination. To quote Rousseau again, we do not exist where we are, we only exist where we are not. We go away not to see what's out there in the real world, but to help concretize and bring out what is in us. The cities and sites we visit and tour are just there to coax, to tease out whatever lies dormant in us. We travel to run into our real selves. We travel to step out of time. Our true life is made up of wisps and hints of what is always other and always elsewhere, of what I like to call the view from across the other bank. We may live along the best rivers in the world, the Hudson, the Seine, the Tiber, the Danube, the Neva, the Rhine, but we're on the wrong bank each time. The view from across may never stays long enough, but this is why we are always compelled with the mirage of the other side. We are beckoned elsewhere, sure, but we're not invited to stay. The reasonable adult in all of us has learned to accept, or at best to adjust to the cards we've been dealt. And most of us know better than to fuss too much. Take it like it is. We are who we are, we live where we live, and these are the times we're born into. Enough already. But I hope I'm not speaking to the reasonable adult. I am speaking to the child in us who is very, very much alive and who still longs with his fists clenched for things, for places, for people, for what that child can't begin to give a name to. Trying to give a name to these things that have no name is how each of us wrote his or her first poem as a child. It is the child in me who keeps buying those wonderful photographic Then and Now volumes published by the Thunder Bay Press. Rome, Then and Now, Paris, Then and Now, Chicago, New York, Boston, Then and Now, Berlin, Then and Now. These volumes juxtapose a photograph of a specific spot in, say, 1900, and another of the same exact spot, taken from almost the identical angle 100 years later. Let me show you some. This is the Temple of Portunus in Rome years ago. Of course, there it is today. And let me go on and give you some more of these if it works. Here we are. This is the Termini Station in Rome as it was long ago. And this is what it looks like today, after I think the fascists had their time with it. Let's see what else. Oh, this is an interesting street, which most of you will not recognize, but this is the street that leads today, and you'll see exactly what Mussolini did to it. So this is what it is now. And this is Largo Argentina years ago. This is today. This, I think, is Place de la Concorde. This is what it's like today. This is the Louvre. And there you have it. Let's see what this is the most interesting one. This is the Gare d'Orsay in Paris, when it used to have trains. And this is now that it's become a museum. What else is, is this the Ansonia? Today, it hasn't much changed, okay? But then you have to look at the people at the very bottom, and you will notice that it's not the same people. It's an issue that I will take up later. Let's see what else there is. This is 6th Avenue with the L, 6th Avenue without the L, Herald Square. I have no idea what this is. Oh, I know what that is. Yes, that's Columbus Circle, before it was built. So you get a sense of where we're going with this. Oh, that's to be seen in a few minutes. Much of the passage of time changes almost everything. The stores, the clothes people wear, the kind of vehicles parked outside the curbs, some things remain constant. It is never clear, though, whether it is permanence or change in these contrasting pairs that I want to spot. If part of me longs to live at the turn of the beginning of the 20th century, another is grateful I'm in the 21st. If part of me loves the present, another yearns the past. I am confused, but I can't let go of these double images. I am looking for the right coordinates in time and space. The more I stare and flip back and forth between these centuries, the more I realize that I really don't know where the real living me is, 1914 or 2014. Or is there some ideal point forever hovering between the two poles that is my true spot, except that I never seem to be able to find it? Nothing corresponds to what I think I want. I am a free-floating prisoner of endless double takes. And yet, as I look at these double images, I already know that it is not just about the cities or even about time. This is about me. But where am I? And since we're asking all these questions, who am I? I look at old New York and ask, where am I? The way one asks, where is Waldo? If I strain and look at this photograph of the corner pharmacy on Broadway and 105th Street, taken in 1911, will I spot the Abbey Pub right across the street where I used to go drinking with friends in 1981? Though I know that when this picture was taken, the Abbey Pub is still 7 decades away from coming into existence. Where is the real me in all this? If I keep staring at this century-old picture taken in the style of Agera, will I spot myself, or better yet, spot a far earlier version of myself ambling along the boulevard? And let's say, if this gentleman crossing the street on his way to the stock exchange is my great-grandfather, can he see me staring at him? Does he know I am trying to connect? Is he even interested? Does he know me? Do I know him? Who of the two is more real? Who of us two has his feet more planted on the ground? He, the one who is ignoring me, or I, the one who is asking the questions? Or let's turn it around and give this fantasy a slight torsion. When my great-grandson will look at a picture of me sitting by the statue of the Four Rivers in Piazza Navona in Rome, 100 years from now, will he even know that I existed once? And that in that picture, a small, infinitesimal part of me was desperately trying to reach out to him? Or let me turn it around a bit more yet, as I look at John Sloane's painting of Greenwich Village. This is the sketch for it. We couldn't find the sketch. There is a sketch that doesn't have this, by the way. So the L is totally missing. But let's go one more. Oh, here we are. You're all familiar with this one. When I look at John Sloane's painting of the Greenwich Village with the elevated train, very much in evidence, and I look at its incipient sketches of it, I'll notice, by the way, that one of these sketches doesn't even have the L on it. He is as though remembering 6th Avenue before the L, all the while celebrating the L, which he and many of his neighbors already fear will be taken down very soon. But when I look at the same 6th Avenue today, I don't see the L. I see the missing L. We've all seen pictures of Penn Station rising from the ground above the raised neighborhood. Let me show you this. It's not even built yet. Well, this is when it's being built, I believe. And this is as it was in its heyday. And there's a beautiful picture, this one here, look at this. To say that we have destroyed that is a crime. And then, of course, this is the rubble. And there's a lot of, this is what we end up having now. We've all seen pictures of Penn Station and the horrifying images of it being taken down. By the way, Parisians are no less horrified when Baron Haussmann had old Paris pierced. Piercing was the technical name he'd given the act to build the new Paris. They were already collecting sketches of and photographs of the Paris that was disappearing before their very eyes, particularly those stunning photographs by Marville of an old and sometimes quite icky Paris, whose glistening gutters perpetually run through grimy alleys and side streets that exist only in Marville's photograph. I hope we can get to see one. No, this is something totally else, but we'll talk about this one in a while. The destruction of large swathes of Paris and of the Butte des Moulins to house Charles Garnier's Place de l'Opéra is today's Paris. In today's Paris is nowhere captured so hauntingly as in Marville's photographs. And yet, the Paris all Parisians would hate to see disappear today is in fact the very Paris that once displaced Baudelaire's lamented Old Paris, le vieux Paris qui n'existe plus. This is today's Paris, but this is as it was being built. So they had to basically destroy Old Paris to give us this. But who would want to see that go? New York City has changed a lot since John Sloane, and yet if you remove the L and add more traffic and lights and more people, this corner of New York City is really not so different. Bleecker Street is still there, Cornelia still there, the Woolworth building looms fluorescent in the distance, and in the evening the store lights along the sidewalks still glisten and beckon to all those who have time to kill. Sloan painted the L and its adjoining Jefferson Market numberless times, a city almost always captured at twilight. Twilight being that two-faced hour between day and night when the city promises things that are at once scary and enchanting, because our bearings are thrown off and everything seems so timeless, yet so thoroughly time-bound that we easily drift into phantom mirage zones. Like Edgar Allan Poe or Gogol, the 19th century poet Charles Baudelaire, who was Poe's French translator, was always stirred by this gaslit hour of the day and must have longed for an older Paris or for imaginary vistas of Poe's New York, the way Poe himself nursed a spectral obsession for an imaginary Paris. Baudelaire was doing what his greatest critic, the German Walter Benjamin, found himself doing many decades later after Baudelaire, when he ambled along the streets of a revamped, updated Paris, all the while seeking out haunting reminders of Baudelaire's mostly disappeared arcade passages. As happens with water dowsers, he felt the magnetic induction of something that was no longer there, what water dowsers call remnants, the phenomenon of finding a memory of something that has vanished and left no trace. The water is gone, but the dowsing rod responds to the memory of water. I've always known I was born in the wrong place at the wrong time. Everything is wrong when you're born in Alexandria, Egypt after World War II, which explains why my feet are not quite grounded, or as my mother used to say, why my head is not quite there. I went to British schools, but we spoke French at home, though we carried Italian passports and were of Turkish origin. Things were so confusing that I ended up loving and turning to books more than the world around me. I remember growing up in Nasser's anti-Western and anti-Semitic Egypt, always being drawn to picture books. Even when I was able to read, I still preferred picture books, especially history books. One of these was called Ma première histoire de France, my first history of France. When I saw the richly illustrated scenes of the Battle of Agincourt, I was always confused because I didn't know whose side I was on. The French or the British, or was I on both sides or against both? On St. Crispin's Day, on whose side could a Jew be if he's born in the worst possible place for a Jew and speaks French, English, and Italian, each one, however, with the accent of the other? But what I liked especially were fairy tale books, especially pop-up books, in good part because I was enamored of the Middle Ages and loved to see the safe medieval world suddenly rise before my eyes as I sat like a castaway in our dismal little Alexandria, Egypt, being read to by my grandmother, who was forever smelling of tea rose and was used to a sewing needle to point at all the odd little gargoyles and faces and windows when she sat with me at our beach house, where she came to stay with us during the summer months. I loved those small snow globe, fenced-in medieval villages that seemed permanently lodged in a faraway happy land with their Gothic spires, gabled roofs, the castle nearby, and narrow candlelit windows that welcomed the setting sun every evening, while a little humble shop featured a bespectacled cobbler tending to his trade before the elves came in later that night, or where a young woman wearing an eternal steeple hat sat by a casement in a turret, languorously awaiting for her beloved. I could stare at these images for hours. They haunted me because I belonged in the weather-beaten alleys of these small Gothic towns in distant northern Europe. Never mind that I was Jewish and never walked into a church. I'm talking about the enduring me, not the person I've had to become or to the person I just happened to be once. If you focused a bit more on the church, you'd hear the peal of bells. A good part of me is lodged in that book, and if I were to find that book again so many decades later, I know that no sooner would I allow these images to rise before me like a genie freed from its captivity than I would be able to palpate the me I always wanted to be, the me who never abandoned me, who is still there, just hiding, just waiting. And yet, if there is a reason why I've never taken a river cruise along the Rhine River, It's because I don't want to be disappointed by what I'd find when searching for my imaginary medieval village. There are three possibilities here. Either I'll discover that such fairy tale towns no longer exist or may never have existed. Or second choice, that my cozy Hans Christian Andersen villages do indeed exist, but not in their pristine state. Instead, they will be disfigured by unavoidable presences of supermarkets, garages, ATM machines, KFC concessions, and countless tchotchke stores thronging with tourists, searching like me their own version of their little Mother Goose land. Or there is a third possibility, the most disquieting of all. I won't visit these towns for fear of finding that they do exist, that my picture books were not lying, that cobbled lanes still house old belfried churches, and that on reaching the main square by bike from the riverboat I will have taken, I will indeed, as the expression goes, come home. This is the moment where everything stops, where the present tense takes over, where the imagination wants for nothing, and where perhaps I'll have to make a decision. The problem is that I don't know or no longer know what it means to want for nothing. Plenitude scares me. I avoid it. I may not want to find my spot. I may want something else. Who knows? I may prefer the frustration of not finding my spot. Sigmund Freud suffered from a similar condition. He was a great traveler, and yet, though he kept planning and promising to visit Rome and was scrupulously poring over maps of Rome, he was always putting off traveling there. He went to other cities, sometimes bypassing Rome even, and going further south because of what so many now call Freud's Roman phobia. Freud was reluctant to visit Rome, no less reluctant than was Hannibal, the great Carthaginian general who tore his way through Italy but then suddenly stopped cold outside of Rome when he could so easily have conquered what at the time was a near defenseless city. So much of Freud's own childhood fascination with history and archaeology was invested in Rome that obviously he didn't want to be disappointed. But that's an easy non-explanation. Freud was ambivalent about Rome, and he came up with an almost plausible explanation according to which Rome was the high point of every European schoolboy's fantasies, especially one trained in the rigorous classical tradition, as Freud was, most certainly, but that Rome's nemesis, Carthage, with its Semitic roots, was equally compelling for Freud because he was Jewish. This seems like a contrived explanation, and it's no less as facile as the one suggesting that he was avoiding Rome so as not to be disappointed. Perhaps Freud was unable to decide whose side he was on, Romans or Carthaginians. Or, more intricate yet, Freud has another explanation for what Rome meant to him and put forth the bit about his and Hannibal's Semitic origins to cover up the real reason, which had quite a lot to do with Goethe's own voyage to Italy and far, far more, I believe, with Winckelmann's flamboyant reinvention of antiquity. One other possible explanation, and it's one among so many, is that not visiting Rome may have been Freud's two-way strategy of prolonging the anticipation, all the while deferring the disappointment. Freud probably didn't want to confront the situation where he'd want for nothing either. But meanwhile, and perhaps because Rome must have represented so many tiers of plausible explanation and equally plausible cover-ups, Freud was able to unearth the idea of Rome and to make it his own by using it to reinvent a vital metaphor in the history of psychology. After finally visiting the city of Rome, he came up with a truly compelling idea, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. The psyche, he says, was like Rome, layer upon layer upon layer of history, layers shifting in place like tectonic plates. Freud must have loved the idea of ruins that are not even the original ruins, but ruins of subsequent restorations. In other words, ruins many times over. The way, as I've just alluded, when we step into the glass dome arcade of the Passage Vivienne in Paris, Let me show you that. There it is, Passage Vivienne in Paris, or for that matter, the far more beautiful Passage in St. Petersburg. Please come up, there you go. What we see is not only a beautifully restored old passage waving at us from the 19th century, what we feel is the ache of displacement many times over. I belonged there, or part of me stayed behind there and keeps calling out to me. Freud loved the idea of those tectonic plates and to imagine a dissolved old palazzo sharing the same the spot with the new building that now sits in its very site. In other words, two buildings hundreds of years apart occupying the same space. When it comes to the psyche, things move around, but they don't go away. He immediately calls this cohabitation of two buildings a fantasy and right away poo-poos it. But he loved playing with the idea of what one might call a stereochronic machine that is able to give a solid three-dimensional image of time, not entirely too different from the camera that Charles Marville himself, the man who gave us old photographs of Paris, claimed to have invented, and that was capable of taking deep three-dimensional images of the Paris that was fast disappearing before him. The idea of ruins, of subsequent restorations, must have galvanized and invigorated Freud's thinking in a truly astonishing way. In Civilization and its Discontents, Freud took his phobic obsession with Rome and finally gave it a meaning, a role, a narrative. To go back to my original thesis, according to which art is about discovery and design and a reasoning with chaos, Freud took an amorphous feeling, a vagary, a fantasy, a Roman phobia, a mirage, a chronic obsession, and gave it a solid form. That form was his metaphor for how the psyche shifts things around, but doesn't forget. By the way, what Freud feared from Rome came to pass when finally, after many years of longing, he was able to see the Acropolis in Athens. What he experienced was what I still fear to see happen when one day I'll finally come home to my fairyland village in Northern Europe. He experienced not disappointment, not even an overwhelming sensation called the Stendhal syndrome, where you collapse on seeing something so beautiful, or a feeling of plenitude. What he experienced was, in his own word, derealization. What I see here, he wrote, is not real, meaning couldn't possibly be real. Not unlike what Stendhal called, in a totally different context, that is, the sexual context, the fiasco, the inability to consummate. He turned wanting for nothing, which is a sense of plenitude on finally seeing the longed-for Acropolis, into a negative. Rather than see the Acropolis, he diagnosed instead a medical condition he called derealization. He was, as Freud always was, seeing something other. An artist like Van Gogh paints a wheat field with a scatter of black crows and is really thinking of something else. For those of you who know the painting, he is thinking, of course, of his own death, or so we presume. Freud sees in Athens a metaphor for a medical condition. To Freud, the non-response to experience, the inability to consummate experience, to connect with experience, is itself an experience. For Van Gogh, form was a painting. For Freud, form was a medical diagnosis. Visiting a place is not necessarily the experience. The real experience is the resonance, the pre-image, the after-image, the interpretation of experience. What we do with experience is the experience. It's the radiance we project onto a place in which the place radiates back to us that constitutes the experience. We come to Rome with our own phantoms. We uncover and read those phantoms in Rome. Suddenly, Rome becomes the embodiment of these phantoms. And perhaps this is a good time to say it, that I seldom myself ever see or love places for what they in themselves really are, nor for that matter do I even know my impressions of them. In the words of Charles Baudelaire, Tout pour moi devient allégorie. Everything becomes for me an allegory. It is allegory he sees, the way it was derealization that Freud saw. It is my mirage that I long to see, the mirage that breathes essence into otherwise lifeless places and objects, the mirage I want to take back with me, the mirage I jot notes about and want to capture, the mirage I crave to write and tell others about. What we reach for and what ultimately touches us is not experience, not the here and now, not what's out there, but the radiance we bring to things. Call it the memory of experience, or something that is not memory, but just memory-like. Art is our attempt not to capture experience, but to intrude on it, to redefine and refine experience, to give it a form. Art is not about places and things, but about our interpretation of places and things. Art sees footprints, not feet, luster, not light, resonance, not sound. It sees what's there before sight or sound happens. Art is not about time or even about the passage of time, but about the inflection of time, the reflux of time. And artists don't necessarily teach us to see better. They teach us to see other than what's there to be seen, what I've called the mirage or the film, the screen, the scrim. It is this other that has always fascinated me. You see something, you see someone, and you see them all right, but in the language of lithographers, you also see the ghost of something else, the afterimage that stays on the lithographer's stone, the way fish scales continue to glisten on the cutting board, long, long after the fish has been sliced open, cooked, and eaten. And that something else is what each one of us brings to the world. And in this, I'm thinking of Monet. If a subject is near impossible to capture on canvas, it is not because Monet cannot paint it. It is because the ethereal thing he thinks he sees is as ungraspable as the stuff of recollection. Monet is not even after light, as so many of us have been taught. He is after air, what he calls the envelope, the thing that wraps around an object, not the object. Which is why when he paints, what he paints doesn't matter. Does he like the Rouen Cathedral? Does he like the Waterloo Bridge? Does he care for haystacks? Monet likes nothing better than to take an instance of something and to return to it, altering its light, painting a scene from this or that angle, at this or that time of the day, and so on. It could be said, and I'm quoting Joachim Pizarro, it could be said that Monet did not, in fact, paint the cathedral. He painted the invisible mass of air between himself and the cathedral. Earth is all about stuff, a clutter of stuff. Art, as I suggested earlier, is nothing more than the invention of design and a reasoning with chaos. In other words, the invisible, to come back to Monet, is the real object. What Monet wanted to reproduce is the distance between the cathedral and his own eyes. The year is 1988. Someone has just given me a calendar as a Christmas present. The calendar contains 12 reproductions of paintings by Monet. The photograph of one of the paintings strikes me. It is the image of a villa. I don't know where the villa is, although the caption says Bordighera. There it is. It is called, in fact, Villas at Bordighera. It's 1988, and after a perfunctory search in the library, I realize, of course, and I don't know it yet, that Google does not exist. So it's the end of the line for me. Time passes. Years later, I am able to find out more about Monet and Bordighera. I'm even able to discover that the villa Monet painted was built by Charles Garnier, the very prestigious architect of the Paris Opera House. Each time I stare at the picture, it speaks to me. I have a feeling, and this is where it gets very tricky, that this villa speaks to me and to me only. Let alone the fact that great art does this to everyone. The way, say, when you wade into the sea and stare at the rays of the setting sun beaming on the water, the light seems to form a flickering band that starts at the sun and is aimed directly at you and at you alone. What haunts me is the color of the wall, the shape of the villa's balcony. They remind me of our summer villa in Alexandria. But maybe Monet's doesn't really resemble our villa. It simply makes me think of the villa and in thinking of the villa, I find myself forging a resemblance that may or may not be there at all. But art does that. It makes you find things in yourself, however trivial, that you would never have discovered without it. And the same holds true for the artist himself. What fascinates him is less the light, less the villa, less even the suggestion of seawater beyond the villa, than something that is more in himself than out there beyond the canvas. It's not in the villa or the town, it's in him. Though he needs the villa and he needs the town and all that amazing foliage to draw it out of himself. This is the town of the same place without the house. And this is the house seen from the other side with the old town of Bordighera up on the hill. As I suggested earlier, it could be the memory of something that borrows the inflections of memory, but not memory. Meanwhile, he's seeing something that isn't there. He has stepped out of the world around him, and when that happens to an artist, we step out of the world with him. We want his world, not ours. We are thrilled to see remnants of his in ours and of ours in his. What joy to walk in New York City and to stumble on scenes of Edward Hopper. This is Edward Hopper. This is my photograph. Not the same scene, but it certainly looks like it. We step out of time when we step into his paintings of old New York. We step out of time when we walk by Jefferson Market today and are haunted by the clattering ghost of the old L running up and down 6th Avenue. I am so taken by Monet's painting of Bordighera with its vegetation, its belfry, its stunning vistas of the Mediterranean, that rather than travel to see it for myself, I decide instead to write about it. I start a novel set in a villa that happens to be in a town whose name starts with the letter B. Same balcony as in Monet, same dirt road, same proximity to an imagined beach, all the while imagining myself living in this house, which happens to be in Bordighera, but let's face it, it's not Bordighera, but in Bordighera as a stand-in for my vestigial Alexandria of blessed memory. I am seeing two towns in this painting, neither of which exists out there. The house is most likely not there any longer, the way the remembered Alexandria of my childhood is not there any longer either. As with my imagined medieval town, I know better than to risk going to Bordighera. Don't want reality to intrude on what I've concocted. In fact, I've reinvented a town that I sense bears no resemblance to the real Bordighera. So long as the house as Monet painted it is in my book, who cares about the rest? Who cares if I've peopled the villa with a father who is a professor, a maid, a cook, a gardener, and two young men who fell in love somewhere in the mid-1980s? I've invented my own fairy tale. No need to visit the real thing. I've done better, the way John Sloan gave us a vision of Greenwich Village that is far more powerful than anything found on 6th Avenue then or now. But something in me is not so sure I can continue to resist going to visit the Bordighera on planet Earth. A year after publishing my novel, I do end up going there. I know I will most likely be disappointed, but at least I'll know. I brace myself for derealization as well, and for fiasco too in case. That could be a big mistake. The train from Nice stops at Bordighera at around 2 p.m. The sun is intense. Everyone is napping. Behind me, a few steps away, is the Mediterranean. This, I realize, is just like my novel. I am walking in a town I've invented. Perhaps this is why this is the most beautiful town I've seen in my life. Everything reminds me of me and of Monet. The town is not only imitating Monet, it's imitating me. I am unable to believe I am here, my slight variation on Freud's derealization. So instead, I keep snapping pictures as a way of pinching myself and proving I've actually been here. I eventually spot the belfry. Gosh, it rises above ground, just as it does in the paintings of Monet. And the palm trees, I think we saw the palm trees before. I couldn't find a picture of the palm trees, but they do look exactly like this because they're all dwarfed. The vegetation, which is superb, almost stupefying, is pure Monet and grows everywhere. I eventually stumble on the old town atop a hill, which Monet painted from a distance. I think we saw it earlier. This is the town here. You see it here, and you see it there. But I don't see the house, which is why I came here in the first place. And yet, just when I'm about to give up and head back to my hotel room, there it is. I think I've spotted the house, discovered by pure happenstance, because each time I ask someone along the street, it turns out that no one knew that Monet had even been in Bordighera. This is the house. Same, and what I try to do in my picture, of course, since I was snapping a picture, this is the balcony that you see in the Monet pictures. The house, as it turns out, is a hotel run by nuns, mostly for elderly folk. They serve lots of geritol, I think. They show me around. I am in love with it. Finally, one of the nuns, still carrying her needlepoint, takes me upstairs and points to me to the door leading to one of the balconies. The stairway is glistening. She takes a seat and radiates a sense of quiet well-being and serenity as she watches me gasp each time I look outside one of the windows. How perfect everything is. Finally, I step outside on the balcony and take a look at the wide, infinite expanse of blue. I hope there's a slide of this. There it is. This is not only like my novel, it is better than my novel. This is not only like our beach house in Alexandria, it's better than memory could ever summon for me. And as for the nun, how could she not remind me of my grandmother and that grand old defunctive world she represented for me, speaking as she used to, in perfect old chaste nun Italian, with its perfect alignment of past and pluperfect subjunctives that I have grown to love, as though my whole life is like a house of cards made of weird tenses and moods that no one in his right mind speaks any longer. In Wikipedia language, subjunctive, and I'm quoting, subjunctive forms of verbs are typically used to express various states of unreality, such as wish, emotion, possibility, judgment, opinion, necessity, or action that has not yet occurred. The subjunctive is an irrealis mood. Here it is, my favorite word, irrealis. As if so many tenses and moods were all folded into one another like Freud's tectonic plates of Rome, mostly the imperfect tense, marginally the present tense, and heavily the conditional mood, all fumbling in a strange medley of the life that might have been but never really happened, but isn't unreal for not having happened, and might still happen, though we know it won't. My grandmother is gone, her old world is gone, Monet is gone, the subjunctives clearly is gone, and yet for a moment as I walk into the hissed balcony on the third floor, I've stepped out of my century and have entered a place that I know does not exist and is definitely very much irrealis, but that definitely exists for me. This is 1910, or it could be 1890. She is still young, my grandmother, doesn't even know she's come back alive for me here. Doesn't know, but of course she knows. She knows that this may have nothing to do with her even, but that I need her radiance here for me to know I've come home. What interests me, though, is not the place itself, but its unreal character. I love the unreal character in every city I've visited. Imagine what would happen to us if we went to Paris and found real Paris, not the movie Paris. If we went to Rome and discovered just Romans, not Fellini's Rome or Paolo Sorrentini's Romans of the great beauty fame. Or if we went to Nice and found nothing like Matisse or Raoul Dufy. Or worse yet, if we went to Alexandria and found a languishing, sprawling, overpopulated Egyptian city, not the brainchild of Lawrence Darrow's most sultry and exotic town, set in a multicultural little port town that couldn't possibly exist in today's Middle East. I traveled to see layers, not things. In my novel, Call Me By Your Name, I named this multi-tiered phenomenon the San Clemente syndrome, after the Basilica of St. Clemente in Rome, which I will show you just a tiny picture of. It is known for having 4 layers of history underneath it: pagan, early church sanctuary, an older church, a church that burnt down where now stands the rebuilt basilica. Here you can touch the transit of time, the way Freud wanted to feel the layers of Rome, Republican Rome, Imperial Rome, late Imperial, medieval, Renaissance, and latter-day Rome, all resonating within him. Perhaps I use the wrong terminology. Perhaps what I want is not what is not there to be seen, that is, that which is unreal. What I want perhaps is more than what is there to be seen. I want not one layer, but many layers. The way I want to have New York not in 1904, but in 1914, 1924, 1934, 44, all the way up to 2014. I want all 100 years of it, the way Bach wanted not one, but 30 variations on a theme by Goldberg, or Beethoven, not one, but 34 phenomenal variations on Diabelli's little theme. The way Monet wanted not one Cathedral of Rouen, but 30. And to my great joy, perhaps because it was highlighted by my son Alex, not one Waterloo Bridge, but enough to make you dizzy and take your breath away. Once again, I find myself invoking the word art. Art is the attempt to dispose of an obsession with the understanding that the obsession will not go away, that it will come back, partly because you can't really work out an obsession on canvas or on paper. It always comes back. But partly because art is the pleasurable process that takes over the obsession and becomes obsessive on its own, and therefore never really wants the obsession originally there to go away. Travel is no different. You travel to find something that never goes away, that crops up everywhere you go, because, to use a common idiom, you bring it with you, the way you say about people that they bring their own baggage. Last spring, I went to visit what is perhaps one of the oldest churches in Rome, Santa Maria Antiqua, and then paid 3 visits to the Church of the Four Saints, both having had their restoration funded by the World Monument Fund. I told the guide to the Church of the Four Saints that, and I was trying to be clever, that I wanted to feel what one feels when one visits the Church of San Clemente. I wanted, I said, to feel both the transit of time and the eternal reflux of time, layers upon layers of time locked under one church. She looked at me with a quizzical eye, as if to dismiss San Clemente, and looking straight at me said, "Sir, you've come to the right place." Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. If there are any questions? Yes, sir? But very loudly. You have to scream your question.
Have you ever gone back to the little house in Alexandria in the last 50 years?
Yes, I've gone back to Alexandria. I was not allowed to go into the house that we lived in because they were afraid that I was going to requisition it. That's usually what happens when you go back to places. Yes, sir.
I romanticize about the old library in Alexandria, the ancient library. Can you tell us anything about that?
The ancient library that burnt quite a few times, not just once.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, it was burnt once and then it was burnt again. And it was not only burnt, it was pillaged. Then they moved some of the books elsewhere. They weren't books, they were scrolls. And they were moved elsewhere. And eventually, the legend has it that when Amr, the Muslim conqueror, arrived in 628, I believe, he torched the whole library, all the remaining manuscripts. And when they told him, what are you doing? He says, oh, it doesn't matter. It's only whatever it is. It's only paper or something. That was the end of that. So, but now we have a new Alexandria, which is probably the new library in Alexandria, which is probably the biggest internet station in the Middle East. I think it's come to that. Yes. Yes, sir.
Clearly, you despair in certain instances like Penn Station, at what time has wrought. But my question is whether you see any positive developments in
Oh, I think there are wonderful things being done, and especially in New York. When you, if you look at the, are you familiar with the station on 72nd Street? They had a subway house, and then they built another one, not like it, but inspired after it, by it in many ways, and it's quite a beautiful thing. It doesn't look ugly. The one they built on 96th Street looks as if it's resisting an invasion. And so that is a quite ugly building. But the 72nd Street, I think, was done very tastefully and very quickly, too. So I'm very happy with it. There are wonderful things being done. I happen to like glass, and I like those glass buildings. I like the feeling of space that glass generates. Yes?
I sometimes think that the cities in the Emirates, with the attracting of universities and museum building, etc., are trying to, in some ways, replicate the great ancient crossroads cities of the Middle East. You ever wonder about that?
No, I think you're right. They are trying desperately to do something like this, but there's a catch. Have you seen there's a ski ski slide? It's Africa. What do you call it? It's a slope. It's an artificial slope. I mean, of course it has to be artificial. It's in the middle of the desert, but there's a slope, and it's almost mortifying at what they're trying too hard. And you're going to have now snow in the desert. Can't you find something slightly more appropriate? But yeah, I think they're trying, and I think the attempt to any place that tries to be cosmopolitan and therefore tries to open itself up and become an open city or an open country, it's always for the better, even if it's done in terrible taste. But I mean, it's certainly better than being closed. I mean, think of Baghdad today. No more questions? Yes, sir.
Most of what you said really resonated with me. My question is, to what extent do you think these feelings are because of your and maybe our immigrant experience, that you don't have a home and you're in different places or different cultures?
Well, I think that what I have is given to me because of my life experience. But what I have is simply a magnified version of what everybody in this room has. In other words, it's more magnified, so it becomes almost like clinical. And most people like, when you travel to a place, you say, I'm very eager to see X, Y, and Z, because I've seen pictures, I've heard so much about it, I want to see it. But in point of fact, what you're really doing is you're trying to bring something with you to that place. A fantasy that may have nothing to do with that place, but it's part of who you are, and you want to cajole it so that it comes alive in that setting. If you can't do that, if you're not projecting something of you on a site, then the site is not speaking to you. It's just there waiting to be clicked. So I think all of us do that all the time. Each of us has a truly sick and twisted way of visiting places that we tell nobody about. But in point of fact, we see things that we're embarrassed to say to people that we've seen, because it's our own little mirages that are not dead. They're still alive with us. And in fact, the easiest way to test this, and I wanted to do this in this room, was to show you pictures of then and now. Whenever you see those pictures, they immediately say something to you, and they say something that you have no sense of what it is really that it's saying, but it's meaning something, but you don't know what it is, except if you really are told to stare at it, you stare at one and you stare at the other, back and forth, and because what you're really trying to find is, where does this affect you? Because you know you're there. And I found that for me when I went to St. Petersburg and I saw the Passage in St. Petersburg. By luck, I had read a thing that Dostoevsky had written about the Passage, and it was truly amazing, because I'm in this Passage. I've never been to Russia. I have never had any Russian ancestors, but I'm there and I'm suddenly understanding it's an imitation of a French Passage that says something to me, but I'm still longing for something there, and I'm seeing things, and I would like to spend hours in this Passage until maybe it will speak to me, but of course it never will. Well, I want to see if is the person who's written a piece, is she here or not? My editor from a magazine, a travel magazine. No, she's not here. Good, so I can talk. She said, she asked me to write a piece about a place that I traveled to, and I said, look, I'm sick and tired of writing about places that I travel to because I always remember something, and I don't want to remember. She said, well, what about anticipating? I said, fine. So I decided that I'm planning to go to Sicily. So, and eventually I did a search on the internet, and I saw Sicily, and I saw those wonderful towns, and one town after another, I've seen pictures of, I've heard my friends talk about them, and it's all very interesting. And suddenly I landed on a place that I never knew existed, and I just loved the name of it, and I focused on it, and I said, this is where I don't only want to go there, I want to spend the rest of my life in that little island of Syracuse called Ortigia, which means quail. So this is where my next destination is going to be, where I will find something of myself there, because I like quail to begin with. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you didn't talk about déjà vu when you visit places, and most people get a déjà vu experience rather than a derealization experience. Did you ever have the déjà vu?
Not when I travel. I have déjà vus when I go in any building, and I have a sense, oh my God, I've been here, that sort of thing. But not when I travel. I've had lots of déjà vus of all places in Boston. I don't know why, but constantly, every time I go to Boston, especially at night, and I travel along Starrow Drive, immediately I have plenty of déjà vus of my childhood. I have to tell you, I've never been to Boston when I was a child, so. But that's where it means something. But it doesn't have to be a new place. One more question. Yes, ma'am.
If you go back to the house that you were in Alexandria, does it change it for you to see it altered? Would it be better never to go back and to be able to remember it as it was when you were there?
The answer is yes. It is a big mistake to go back to anything, because what you see eventually is what time has done to it and what it has done to you. And to see that disconnect is horrible. So when I said that I went back to Alexandria to visit my old apartment, I said they didn't allow me, but I could have insisted, and I could have begged, and I could have stayed and argued and said, come on, just 5 minutes, let me see the old apartment, blah, 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 blah. But I didn't. I said, oh, thank you very much, and I left. So I didn't really want to see anything. Just going back to Alexandria, a place that obviously resonates a lot with me, that I never really loved, but that resonates with me nonetheless, was disappointment enough. So I'm never going back there again.